All right. Thank you, everybody, very much. Hello, how are you doing tonight? My name is Justin. I am the host. This is the Decrypted Podcast. I hope everybody is doing very well this evening. Tonight, we have a very awesome show lined up for you. It is episode 5. It is our first actual conversation about what drives me the most, and that is Bigfoot. Better known as Sasquatch, the Yeti, the Yeren, the Yowie, known all over the world under many names, by many tribes, by many people, and not so much about the actual animal or biped itself, but more so most of the evidence. This episode is kind of stemmed off of a tweet that I have been out in the Kettle Moraine, which is a large national forest out by my house recently, and just out there looking for anything that we can find. I have never seen anything weird or heard anything weird, or I can't imagine anything described as weird out there. So, but this is what this episode is about, and it's about a tweet, like I said, that I had sent out earlier last week, and it had gotten a lot of great feedback. So I kind of wanted to do an episode, maybe our first of many episodes on this subject at hand. So I want to start by talking about one thing before we get going, and that is thanking somebody very, very close to me and very special to me, and that is Seth. Seth was a co-host of mine for the first 4 episodes, as well as a kind of a side riff session about Hell in the Cell, WWF. Seth and I hate each other. We cannot stand each other anymore, and we have decided to call quits on the podcast. I fucking hate you. I'm just kidding. But to be very honest about something, I wanted to thank Seth very much. He had been an instrumental help in getting this podcast off the ground. He has done a lot of hard work. And so basically from here on out, for now, the podcast is actually just going to be done by me. And I just wanted to clear stuff up there. That Seth and I have no ill will. I have known Seth for 20 plus years. And there was just a time commitment on both of our ends. One, it was so difficult to get episodes scheduled around the same time and recordings around the same time that I didn't want to hold him accountable for being there more than he wanted to be, and he was very understanding about that. And like I said, more time commitments on him. Seth is a busy guy. He works for a great company, and he does a ton of fishing and other things in his life, and blah 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 blah. I mean, the point I'm trying to get at is that he will no longer be joining us on the episodes. He is definitely welcome as a guest at any time, and he knows that for sure. And to make sure that everybody else kind of knew what was going on, that from now on, the format is going to kind of change just a little bit on the show. And I want to thank everybody already for their support for the Decrypted Podcast. And I promise this won't go on much longer. But I wanted to thank everybody, but I wanted to clear some stuff up. That there has been no ill will, obviously, towards us. He just had some time commitments and scheduling constraints that had kind of separated us, and that is, I mean, there's 25 days here between episodes, and I don't think that's fair to the people, all 6 of you, who really consider yourself fans of the show. So I really wanted to make sure that we were able to put out a show of quality, and he said the same thing, and we just wanted to make sure that, you know, we were doing the show for the reasons that we wanted. And I think I speak for Seth when I say that he had a lot of fun doing the show, and we both had a lot of fun with each other. But again, due to some time constraints and interest availabilities, I mean, we've just kind of decided to separate ways. So with that said, again, we are changing the format here at the Decrypted Podcast. I'm not really sure where this is going to go. I don't really know what we're doing as far as what has kind of been described as what we're going to do from now on. And while I can't edit this out of the video that's going to go on YouTube, I can't edit it on the video that's going to go live on the Spotify site. But I just wanted to say that I thank everybody for hanging out with me tonight. I thank everybody for forever supporting the show or listening to the show. And let's get this show on the road. So tonight is our topic, and I literally, and I mean 3 seconds before I hit that live button, I was still putzing through about the 15 open. How many open? About 16 open tabs that I have on my computer. And literally I was going to title the episode Bigfoot Evidence, and I literally pulled up a story by George Norrie on Coast to Coast AM, and he has a Bigfoot Evidence episode name, so we'll try to figure out a name as we kind of go through this and talk about this. But I wanted to talk about something tonight that was very near and dear to my heart, very, very much the reason we had started the Decrypted Podcast, or or I had decided, 2 years ago that I really wanted to start this podcast and what we would be talking about. And I thought originally that the podcast was only going to be about Bigfoot. I was like, man, I could just do a whole mess of series on Bigfoot. And I think kind of once I started getting into it, and aliens have always been a big part of my life. If you've ever listened to the first episode, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that we could talk about that I've always been interested in. I mean, like everything up until like ghosts and ghost stories, which I don't discredit. I guess as far as the paranormal is concerned, I don't have a large interest in, or a large vested interest in. But when it comes to stuff like this is the meat and potatoes. This is my wheelhouse, and I really hope that you guys enjoy tonight's episode. So without any further ado, without thanking any more people, we're going to dive right into evidence that suggests that Bigfoot exists, and just kind of talk about how I feel about Bigfoot evidence and how Bigfoot evidence is presented to the greater community. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Bigfoot community themselves. I have been kind of really diving very deep over the last year of kind of getting into the community of people that kind of support what we're doing. And that goes as far as talking to rather other podcasters, bloggers, and, just researchers in general. And I do want to touch base on some of the things that, some of the experiences that I've come across, and we're going to get to all those things. So some of the evidence that we're going to be talking about are tracks and vocals and sightings and tree knocks and tree structures and somatic samples, which is pretty much anything biological. You're talking hair, DNA, skin, anything kind of like that shit, scat, whatever you want to call it, about the Sasquatch. And if you are watching on the recorded stream that's going to go up on the YouTube channel, and which you guys can always jump onto the Decrypted Podcast at the YouTube channel, you're going to see a little image or several images rather, of just Bigfoot stuff in general. For those of you listening at home, I'm going to try to it's the only thing that's going to be visually appealing to you at all. So nothing that I'm going to bring up today is going to be based on the pictures that are flying across the screen tonight. So I just wanted to get that out of there. To start the episode, I want to talk about how I know this has been done before. Okay. I know that podcasts have talked about Bigfoot. There are podcasts dedicated solely to Bigfoot, and I've listened to some really awesome ones. And some of them have been a real reason for me to get started in doing this. I'm not really here to offer you any new evidence, and I'm not really here to change your mind on the subject. I wanted to kind of go forward in this and saying that if this isn't something you're into, or if you somehow stumbled across this, as a skeptic, I guess I just would say to turn this off right now. I'm not looking at this from a skeptic point of view. There are people in the community that are believers. There are people in the community that are knowers. And then there are people in the community who, believe it or not, are still skeptics, for that matter. So, for those of you who are skeptics, I don't mind you listen to my show. I certainly don't mind you listening to this episode. Please, by all means, throw a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure that you guys check it out on the Spotify. But this episode isn't for you, and I don't feel like any of our episodes are necessarily going to be for you. I don't cater to the skeptic. I do try to be as open-minded as I'm going to try to be, especially now that I'm doing this by myself. I don't have my skeptic friend, my skeptic co-host rather, to kind of support your end of the story. So here I am. I'm going to be trying to talk to the knowers and the believers. So again, if you don't like what you're hearing, I don't blame you. If you don't like what you're dealing with, you don't like the idea of what's going on here, I don't blame you. But this is my passion, and this is kind of where I'm going to go with this podcast, and kind of do kind of everything I wanted to do originally with this. And that's not to say that anybody held me back from doing that originally. It was my idea to bring Seth on as a skeptic and try to kind of hold myself accountable to some of the things I might say or do or feel or blah, 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 blah. But I wanted to make sure that you guys knew from the beginning of this episode what we're getting into. So without further ado, for the second time, let's try to jump into something. So evidence of Bigfoot has been around, I mean, forever is tough to say, right? People came over here to the, quote, New World, wasn't so new to the people who were already here, and started hearing legends and tales of a creature who was 7 to 10 feet tall, some reports being up to 15 feet tall, which literally I cannot tell you how I cannot fathom something being 15 feet tall. It's taller than an elephant, right? It's taller than an African elephant, or at least as tall as. And hairy bipedal creature roaming the woods of these areas. And again, these people came over here hearing this. So, I mean, you have reports in the current United States as early as the mid to late 1700s, and then more famously kind of into the 1800s. And then when we start talking about Bigfoot in the local, or not local, but more like oh man, the broad spectrum, or the like the everyday idea. I'll come across this word in 10 minutes and I'll spit it out of my mouth without context. But we're talking about the 1950s, and we're talking about Jerry Crew and the inches, or the tracks that he found being about 16 inches long, just sitting by his construction equipment deep in the woods of Northern California, and then has kind of embarked on its own kind of details since then. And since then, the people have been fascinated by it. Now, you could argue that people since the 1970s were, I guess, when people really kind of clung on to this. You have the Patterson-Gimlin footage in 1967 that really kind of takes the national stand and kind of says, here, look, this is the first time that we're all showing this is our magical evidence. This is what we're bringing forth to the table here. And kind of since then, that's when it's kind of been, and you can, I mean, it's 2019 when we're doing this, and you can look at, there's been 3 or 4 mainstream Sasquatch movies in the last 2 or 3 years. Bigfoot, there's a Littlefoot movie where like the whole Bigfoot idea, which I think is really neat, and it's a Pixar movie, but I'd love to see it. It's the idea that like this man is brought into the Bigfoot community, and the Bigfoot community is like, I didn't know these people exist. It's basically it's a flip, on how people feel about how we rather feel as humans about what Sasquatch is like. So I think it's really neat. It's been at the forefront of society and mainstream media and whatever you want to call it, pop culture. There you go. Not too far out of context. Pop culture was the word I was looking for. But it's been at the head of pop culture now for at least the last 60 to 70 years. And I really wanted to take a deep dive into what kind of evidence the Bigfoot community has brought forward. I don't think that there's a ton of compelling evidence, and that's heartbreaking. And I know it's heartbreaking for the people who are true believers and knowers to hear, and a ton of people who have arguments against the idea that, no, you know what, there's been tracks, there's been spectrographic images that show that the vocals that people are hearing and recording are not human made, or there's tree knocks that I've heard out there, and there's tree structures that have been built, and there's tracks everywhere. And the bottom line is that science refutes the one main claim to evidence, and that is a physical body. And there have been no physical bodies. Nobody has shot a Bigfoot, and is Wes Germer, I think his name is, from Sasquatch Chronicles, always likes to say he doesn't have one in his garage that he's studying, and nobody does. And nobody has any idea at the end of the day how they really want to formulate their opinion on this, or can really legitimately formulate their opinion. But that doesn't mean evidence or supposed evidence hasn't been brought forward. And that's some of the things I would love to touch on. So let's get right into some of these things. We'll be covering, like I said, tracks, scat, sightings, tree knock structures, body samples. We're talking skin, hair, DNA, stuff like that. Vocals that have been recorded over the years. Casts, as you could have just seen on my left side there, for anybody who's definitely watching the YouTube show. These things have been going on and brought to the public attention and government forums such as the FBI and legitimate scientists and researchers for 60 years, and still nobody can sell me yes or no. And that's one of my favorite parts, and I want to maybe stress that to the people I was already talking about, how we don't have the evidence to prove it, but they haven't brought me anything, and they haven't brought us anything as the believers, as the knowers, which I include myself in. They haven't brought us anything to say that they don't exist. And I think that is a really wonderful, wonderful, wonderful piece of evidence that is used to kind of counter a lot of the, quote unquote skeptics that kind of are out there. So, about 60 years ago, 1958, so about 70, or maybe, I'm not going to do my math here, about 1958, in Northern California, the tracks are found by Jerry Crew and his crew in the woods of Northern California. Now, this is coincidentally in the same area of the sighting of the Patterson-Gimlin footage that was going on there a long time ago. And Jerry Crew is a logger, and he owns this. He runs with this logging for works for the wrong. He actually works for Ray Wallace, who we're going to talk about here in just a second, and he has been working in the woods now, and he works for a few months at a time, and every weekend he decides to go home. If you've ever been out to Northern California, it's very desolate. It's very not an area that you're going to want to just kind of hang out in, unless you're out there hiking. It's there's no gas stations, there's no stores, no malls, no for the most of us, for quote unquote researchers, it's prime time Bigfoot location. Jerry Crew is out there running a logging company. I don't know if he's necessarily running the company or he's running the crew for the company that Ray Wallace is kind of running. But he's out there, and every weekend they come home. Now, every weekend they come home, they're not going to drag all of these heavy machinery back out, so they leave it out there. Jerry Crew finds these massive 16-inch by 5-inch tracks out there, and this is like, bam, what is going on? First time we're seeing this look at these tracks, and he takes these casts, and he comes out to the public, and he says, hey, here we are. I found these tracks out here. These tracks are kind of later revealed as a hoax that was perpetrated by the late Ray Wallace, and his children are kind of the people that kind of come forward with this. And he definitely... Sorry for everybody recording. The cat wanted up. But so he comes back for the weekend, and he finds these tracks in there, dug into the soil and into the sand of the area, and he is totally perplexed. And the things that I read about Jerry Crew, about Jerry Crew, is that he's a very straight up guy. He doesn't believe, he's a kind of a no nonsense, like, hard worker, and he's got a ton of people on his crew. A lot of them are of Native American descent, and he kind of comes to them and says, do you guys see these tracks that are all around our construction equipment? Like, what is this? And basically nobody has any answers for him. They're just kind of hanging out saying, I don't know what's going on here. Now, we talk about how this kind of comes to the forefront in pop culture at this time. And later, as we talk about this, we're going to talk about how we're going to talk about Ray Wallace. And Ray Wallace is, according to his children and his wife, is a known joker or hoaxer or whatever you want to call it. And so there's a lot to kind of go on, or go off of, rather, when we talk about this. So the tracks they're large. We talk about, they're about 16 inches long, about 5 to 6 inches in width, and they're nothing like anybody currently has kind of really ever seen, or certainly ever really talked about. And they get brought up to the local newspaper. This guy goes out there and he's checking this out, and he's all of a sudden, he's like, man, this is something else. Like, this is real. Like, I can't put my finger on this. I can't believe something like this. And he kind of calls Jerry Crew out and says, listen, man, you're out here just fucking with me. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Like, you're fucking with me. These guys are fucking with me. This guy's fucking with me. I'm out of here. And he doesn't take any of this seriously until another reporter kind of goes out there and starts taking his story seriously. And then that's where we start running into what is now currently pop culture's obsession with what we now call Bigfoot. That's actually where Bigfoot was termed, was with this article. If you're a fan of the show, or if you're a fan of any other people, I would like to call it a Sasquatch. I don't really know why the name sits a little bit easier with me. It sits a little bit more professionally with me. So we're going to call it Sasquatch as much as I possibly can. But these tracks are later kind of revealed by Ray Wallace's family as a joke, that Ray Wallace would actually go out there. And now this is again more supposed information, because there's plenty of people who also contend that Ray Wallace, while being a total joker, they didn't have the money. You're talking about going 3 or 4 hours off of the interstate, getting to these areas where people basically lived for 3 to 4 months out of their lives, bi-weekly rather. You know what I mean? They go home on the weekends to kind of take care of this, but these guys are out there all the time, and a lot of money is being spent and invested into taking care of these things. And there's really no reason that a guy like Ray Wallace, who is running this organization and these people that he's sending out there, there's no real reason for him to hoax these. But his family has later come forward, his sons have later come forward and said, listen, I was just fucking with you, man. Like, my dad has been out here playing jokes on us since we were kids. His wife is kind of like, he's been playing jokes on the kids since they were babies. Like, that's just how he goes. It's so also important to know that none of these hoax confirmations really came to light until well after Ray was dead, and that any of these times, like, he could have come out himself and been like, yeah, I was just screwing around. Like, what's to stop an old man from just being like, listen, man, I was screwing around. Like, I'm sorry that everybody kind of got caught up on this. I'm sorry that everybody kind of got into this, but I was messing around. Okay. But this, again, is the first time we're going to start finding tracks. And one of the coolest things about this is that none of this ever stops, right? People find tracks every year, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of tracks. And even later, as we discover about the Patterson-Gimlin footage, which is right around the Bluff Creek area, which is like down the street, and I mean that very literally down the street. It's still in Bluff Creek that a lot of this construction was going on, that these prints were covered. And so we're going to see a ton of physical evidence as far as tracks are concerned that go on to that predate and pro-date, I guess if that's even a word, Ray Wallace and Ray Wallace's family's claims that these were fake. The bottom line is that if you're a believer or not, one thing is for certain, there's no way that a man, and even if he included his family in on the hoax, which apparently according to his family he didn't, there's no way that one person's going to go out there and recreate thousands of tracks. We have tracks in Maine, in Vermont, in every state, as a matter of fact. I'm not going to name all the states. We have basically track and sightings in every state besides Hawaii. Every state, every 50 continental United States, except for Hawaii, has some sort of evidence brought forward suggesting that these creatures will exist. One of the more unnerving parts about the tracks that I found is that in doing kind of this research for this episode is that articles that talk about Ray Wallace and talk about his family, and I want to say his family came forward in like 2004 or maybe 2012. I cannot remember. I wish I'd have put Ray Wallace's death date on here just so that we could have a frame of reference. But one of the things that bugs me or irks me the most is that in none of the articles that I came across does anybody discredit the hoaxer. Okay? He is a hoaxer. His whole idea is to play tricks on people and screw with people and create this evidence that might not exist, and not a single, every one of them literally takes him at his word. Like, I believe this. It's fucking mind-boggling and incredibly frustrating as a researcher or whatever you want to call myself, or whatever I want to call myself. It's incredibly frustrating. Not a single attempt is bothered by any news or media organization that I have read that discredits this guy as an actual hoaxer, and it drives me up the wall. And one of the more unnerving quotes that I got, which are prime examples of the nature of the attitude that journalists and supposed reporters have on this issue, was done by, I'm not going to name his name, but the quote is literally, quote, "This woman did not see Sasquatch. I know what she saw. I don't know what she saw, but I can guarantee you it was not Bigfoot. I'm not a scientist and have no field experience in the search of the legendary, hairy, giant man-like creature. However, I have a bit of evidence, or lack thereof, that cannot be refuted." End quote. Can we just talk about the bullshit of this comment? I am not a scientist. I have no field experience in the search of the legendary man-like creature, but apparently this person is going to give me evidence, and he is going to say, I don't know what she saw, but he can guarantee it's not a Bigfoot. The asinine comments, the asinine reporting, the people who don't want to take this seriously, the people who have no interest in taking this seriously, it is tabloid, the people that make this tabloid research are the people that are hurting this idea. The idea of science is to study the unknown. And if it's already known, to work there from what you know and what you can find out. If you are a credible scientist, in the field, you look to continue the conversation here. No matter what the conversation is about, whether it's space and time, whether it's what lurks at the bottom of the oceans, whether it's what's hairy hominid is lurking in the Himalayas. Whether it's microcosms, microorganisms, whatever the situation may be, no scientist just stops at the wall and says, that's science, that's the end of the conversation. Yet this piece of shit is going to come through and say that he doesn't know what she saw, but he can guarantee you what it isn't without the idea of any experience being in the field or having any scientific research done at all. And those are the kind of things that I think all of us believers and all of us knowers, and even hopefully you as a skeptic, if you're still, for whatever reason, listening to this, can really understand and really take away. How do you understand how that hurts the scientific conversation? Do you understand that how that hurts the scientific community at large? The people who actually, the Jeff Meldrums of the world who are looking into this, John Bindernagels, who are looking into these things as a legitimate scientist, as a legitimate cause, how you are going to just wash away all of that conversation because you think you know best as some radio host or some, quasi researcher of whatever you can consider paranormal. I find that to be absolutely disturbing. Absolutely disturbing. You're talking about thousands of tracks found over the last 60 to 70 years. That's documented, by the way. That's with the idea in mind that, all right, I'm going to go out and plaster these casts. Hundreds of plaster casts are on the internet that you can buy. Of original plaster casts, talking about Bluff Creek, talking about in Ohio, talking about in Vermont, talking about in the eastern Texas region that we all know about. These things are there. Yet these people like this guy are going to come out and refute this evidence while also admitting that they are not a scientist or have any experience in research in the field. And I know I've driven this point home over the last 10 minutes, but that could not make me any more frustrated. Some of these prints are up to 24 inches long and 8 inches wide with strides of 36 inches from back heel to front toe. So unless you're standing in one spot and jumping full-legged through 2 feet of snow, or up to the Bluff Creek incident was almost 2 miles that they tracked this thing, then you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind as a scientist, as a researcher, as a skeptic, to not even consider the possibility. At Medical Lake, Washington, they found tracks that measured 23 inches long and had a stride of 35 inches, almost 3 feet from heel to toe. The tracks went on for about a half a mile. Do you have any idea what kind of work had to go into the snow and what kind of work would have to go into hoaxing something like this? And do you want to know what? I'm one of the first one of the first people that's really going to side with the skeptics in the sense of people fuck with other people. It happens all the time. But nobody that I can possibly think of would think about going to that or not be seen or not be. You're talking about in remote areas of the world. Okay? Remote areas. Let's not even talk about the US. Let's jump into 2019. In Makalu National Park in India, where Indian Army mountaineers, the Army of India, allege that they find these tracks of a Yeti, and they posted their official Twitter account, and these tracks are 32 inches by 15 inches. Now, you can give or take a few days of snow melt in here to make these things a little wider, but nothing discredits the idea that there are 32 inches with toe marks. Snowshoes leave a very obvious impression in the snow. They were quoted saying, "We thought it prudent to go public to excite the scientific temper and rekindle the interest in this." There are other governments out here besides our own who are interested in pursuing this. Not only the Indian government. In China, they have dedicated land to the Yeren. Dedicated land. And there are laws in this country and in Canada that specifically talk about not being able to shoot one. You are not allowed to kill a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or Yeti. Because in theory, if they exist, they exist in such a realm that they would be endangered. Now, why would we ever even put that in the books? Why would we ever even consider putting that in the books if nothing like this existed? I think a lot of people, especially in the U.S., look at it from one perspective, and that is from the U.S., which is totally understandable. That's how a lot of people look at anything from any from their own culture. From their own culture. But we look at countries around the world have acknowledged that this thing exists. Scientists and researchers in China believe that this exists to the extent of going to the government and saying, you need to set aside land for this. You need to set aside dedicated space to make sure that these things have an ability to thrive, whether they are real or not. Whether you think, and pointing directly at the politicians, whether you think they are real or not, we as scientists have come to you and said they are, and that they can exist. And that not only can they, but we believe that they do. And furthermore, we need you to set aside land. And the government said, sure, that makes sense. That makes sense. And it's unbelievable that we in this country cannot get behind an idea like that. So not only that, scientists agree that tracks are most substantial and reliable forms of evidence that we have found to support the existence of Sasquatch. And we're going to touch on it a little bit too, the hair, skin, and DNA samples that Dr. Melba came across. And I'm not going to get too far into that, but that's those are some of the most compelling pieces of evidence that we have for these creatures. And to not take this stuff seriously is incredible to me. I don't understand the logic of second guessing these kind of things. I get that nobody's chopped the arm off of a Bigfoot or the foot off of a Bigfoot and brought it in and said, look what I found. No bones have been discovered, and that's a big thing. Where are the bones? Where are the bones of all these things? Okay, let's back up a little bit and talk about the areas that these things are found. Heavily forested, heavily densely forested areas. If you're talking Pacific Northwest, a rainforest. You do not find the evidence of predatory animals, of apex predatory animals in any situation. Lions, you don't find them with bears, you don't find them with wolves. You are a lucky person. I have listened to hunters recount hundreds of times their stories, and they don't come across bear bones. You don't come across wolf bones. And I don't really understand. I can't tell you right now definitively why, but I can tell you the reasons that I've heard. And that's because these predators, they know when they're going to die. Animals know when they're going to die. They know here this is the end. They're not as ignorant to the idea of death as we are. Okay? So now that they're going to lay under a tree, they're going to go lay into a cave. You talk about elephant graveyards. These creatures are smarter than we give them credit for. And I mean, known animals are smarter than we give them credit for. And they know when their time has come. And even if they didn't, if they were killed by another wild animal, not only will they be devoured, possibly by that animal, they will be devoured by the forest. Life feeds on life, feeds on life, feeds on life. Okay? It didn't take Maynard James Keenan, the song, to fix this, to fixate this issue in our minds. When something dies in the forest, guess what eats it? The forest. Bodies can last up to 3 days. You're talking about an existence of a creature with, and I don't know if Meldrum is behind this, but a lot of scientists have concluded that you need about 500 minimum of these things to exist. 500 minimum. Do we know what the scale of North America alone is? 9.3 million square miles. 500 creatures over 9.3 million square miles. If this thing falls dead in the forest, do you think any one of us is just going to stumble across? Not a chance. Not a chance. The forest will devour this thing before you know it. And break down the bones and break down all these things. And the insects will eat it, and birds and carrion, and all of these things take care of it. That's how nature works. And that evidence isn't about Bigfoot. That evidence is about wolves and bears and coyotes and everything else that dies in the forest. You don't find these bones everywhere. So when people come to you and say, well, where are the bones? Where are the bodies? Well, why haven't we found this? That's why. That's as simple as answering that question for any other known species. Okay? And that's just tracks. We have vocals, body samples, sightings, tree knocks, tree structures, all of these things that can kind of go into this. Let's talk about vocals. The Sierra sounds, the Ohio howls. Ron Moorhead sitting in the middle of the woods in the Sierra Nevadas decides to hang a microphone from a tree. Him and the guy he's with start hearing these weird noises. And they notice that every time they leave the area, these two creatures start chattering back and forth. Now, again, I'm not here to bring any new evidence. If you are a Bigfoot researcher, you have heard these noises. You have listened to these Sierra sounds. And if you haven't, I really pull up YouTube right now, pause the stream, listen to the Sierra sounds, or otherwise known as the samurai sounds. These things were studied by U.S. Navy linguistics, University of Wyoming. Researchers, scientists have said these sounds are actual conversation. Linguistic expert, a U.S. Navy linguistic expert, Scott Nelson. These are an actual conversation that these things are having. The University of Wyoming spent years researching the sounds and concluded that they were certainly primate sounds, and that their lung capacity, and this is the same thing by Scott Nelson, the lung capacity of these things went far beyond the ability of humans. Once you put these up to spectrographs, nothing on the market can put the sounds where these things are. Those are just two incredible resources that you have at your disposal as a researcher to bring to the table when somebody talks about how they don't exist. The Ohio Howl in Columbiana County, Matt Moneymaker comes, he's sitting on the Ohio side of the Ohio Valley, the Ohio River, about 100 miles, by the way, from what is known as the Chestnut Ridge, which is where a ton of bizarre things have already happened. We're talking alien sightings, Mothman sightings, bizarre encounters with just about every major thing have already happened. And he is able to capture these sounds, these beautiful, these low howls of this insane noise, unexplained. And when pulled up on a spectrograph, in both of these situations, the Sierra sounds and the Ohio howl, not only have they withstood the scrutiny of skeptics, but both were studied by scientists and universities, and were not only shown to be beyond the human capability, the human ability to make that noise, but they were also shown to be not primate in nature. Primate in nature, but not humans. As far as I know, beyond the idea of Bigfoot, let's throw Bigfoot and Sasquatch out the window. Say they don't exist at all. Let's say we live in a world where none of this is covered. There's no Patterson-Gimlin footage. There is no known North American primate. Period. None. Whatsoever. Never has been. Never will be. Okay? Yet these sounds pulled from the Sierra Nevadas, and from deep within Ohio, it was the Ohio-West Virginia border, an area very well known for its weirdness. It's about 100 to 200 miles away from Point Pleasant. Okay? Well-known areas. You're not going to find any weirder place in the entire United States than the Ohio River Valley. Okay? I can almost guarantee that. But they were primate in nature. And we're the only primates in North America. Spoiler alert. Human beings are the only primates in North America, and that's fine, so take that as you will. But what's the next step beyond that? The spectrograph. We cannot execute the noises that these things were making on the levels that they were making them. And people want to write it off as some anomaly in the woods. And those are two examples. There have been a ton of recordings that have fit this description, that have pulled up to spectrographs with dog howls and coyote howls and bear screams and moose, whatever they are, whatever noise a moose makes. Okay? Whatever that is. And none of them hold a glass of water to these things. None of it. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But to every Tom, Jane, Dick, and Harry, I almost really screwed that up. that want to refute this, they're going to bring up whatever they want. I want you to be well armed going into a conversation, as I am now well armed to go into a conversation with a skeptic. I don't go picking fights with these people. I don't like look for somebody I know. Hey, do you believe in Bigfoot? I don't pull people aside in the street. Do you believe in Bigfoot? No? Okay, well, here's why you're an idiot. I don't do that. But when I tell people what I do as a passion of mine, when I tell people what I do as a free time, as a hobbyist, and they scoff and they laugh and I'm ready. I'm ready. Tracks, got you. Sounds, got you. Witness sightings in the thousands a year. A year. In Wisconsin alone, since 1972, there have been almost 100 documented sightings from 1976 to 2018. That's in my state alone. So I just want to point that out. You guys got to go into this armed at the teeth for these skeptics, because they're going to do nothing but try to shoot you down and bring you down, and it's unbelievable. So, what next? What else do we get to talk about? Bodily samples, somatic being anything biological that we can take hold of. Now, the first few things that we talked about on this list, there are things that I believe in firmly. When we get down to pictures and tree knocks and tree structures, I'm going to start discrediting some of this stuff. So if you're already 45 minutes into my podcast and you think I'm just so all in that this guy is out of his mind, just give me a minute, all right? Because I'm about to describe to you some other stuff. But for now, we're going to talk about some hair and skin DNA. So samples of supposed Bigfoot hair went into the FBI in analysis in the 70s and was returned to find that the Bigfoot looked into, or excuse me, the FBI looked into this. You know, to their credit, they were sent some DNA samples, some hair samples by a scientist that said, listen, I found these out there that don't match what I'm looking for. Can you just tell me what they are? Your forensic research unit is the best in the world, right? Especially at the time. Can you tell me what these things are? The FBI came back and said they're deer. Listen, man, these are deer samples. Could the FBI be lying to us? It wouldn't be the first time. But my guess is that they probably weren't lying to us. I don't really think the government has a lot to gain by covering this up. And I know a lot of people talk about the lumber industry or national preserve industry, that the money that these big things bring in, and that should these things exist in some way, the land that would have to be divided to them would cost this country billions of dollars that we don't have. I don't really know. I don't really know if I can contend with that theory. I don't know enough about it, and I don't want to know. I shouldn't say I don't want to know. I haven't looked into it enough to be able to contend with that theory. But I for whatever reason, and as I looked into this, and as I looked into reasons for this, I didn't see this as being, there's no reason here. They could have at least said, you know what I mean, unidentifiable, but they didn't. They're deer, okay? Most samples of hair too are now handled by more researchers on site. And since a lot of people don't know, and I mean this sincerely, and I know a lot of people out there, like, I know how to handle DNA samples. Most people know what the fuck they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. So they grab it, they go, hey, Tom, what's this? Fine, pull this pull this hair sample off of a tree. Then they hand it to Tom. Tom looks at it, hands it to Mary. Mary hands it to Jane. They got 4 fingers on it. Okay? Then it goes in the bag, and we're going to send this out. We're going to make sure we test this. And that kind of stuff comes back inconclusive. And it's very difficult. And this is where the scientific community needs to step up and help us out. And you need to put these people out there. You need to put these people in the field. You need to stick them out there and say, hey, listen, I need somebody who's going to know how to handle this. I found this hair. I need tweezers. Plop them from the tree. Put them in the bag. I don't give a shit how much you look at them, but get them in the bag first, okay? But that doesn't happen in a lot of cases, okay? In 2012, an Oxford study took about 50 samples of supposed Sasquatch hair, okay? Of those 50, almost 20 of the samples, almost half of the samples came back as to be plant-based fibers or literally glass-based fibers. Plant or glass. 50% of them. Which can go to prove that we might not necessarily know what we're looking for, but at least these people are out there looking for it. You know? These people aren't armchair researchers, but then they're not scientists. Which is what the community needs more of. And what we need the most, I think. And since most of us really don't know what we're doing out there, myself included, we end up contaminating the DNA beyond our recognition, beyond anything that the FBI or anybody else can really do about it. So of that 50, 20 of them out the window. What are they going to do? The others of the 50, the 30X remaining, there was 57, I think, taken technically, are actual animal species. We're talking about bears, wolves, horses, cows, raccoons, deer. In one instance, one was a human. One was literally just a human hair. Fucking Chuck out there not paying attention. He got his hair caught on a branch and then turned around. Like, hey, I think I found a Sasquatch hair. Your own hair, Chuck, you fucking idiot. Okay? And another one happened to be a porcupine. A porcupine. Guys, if we don't know what we're looking for, put it in the bag. Okay? Put it in the bag. Don't touch it with your hands. Take your tweezers, put it in the bag, and move out. Now, on to a more, I am going to hesitate to call this credible. Dr. Melba. If you know anything about Bigfoot research, especially if you've really done your homework, you might have heard of the name Dr. Melba. Now, Dr. Melba is a veterinary science major. I shouldn't say major. A graduate of a lot of medical science, both human DNA research and medical or animal DNA research, and has done a lot of. She literally did testimonies for the FBI about DNA research, and literally went on trial in criminal researchers and was able to put people away based on her knowledge, or free people based on her knowledge. And she runs this thing called, excuse me, the Sasquatch Genome Project. Now, we could do. I want to get more into this, but we're already 48 minutes into the episode, and I wanted to get more into this. But the fact of the matter is that the Sasquatch Genome Project could literally have an entire episode based on itself. Period. There is so much insane things that have gone on, and so many crazy things. Now, Dr. Melba has literally brought to, there is a database in the world that you bring DNA samples to, so that it's basically like Titan AE. If you've ever seen the movie, when we basically end up destroying each other, we'll have all these DNA samples to just then recreate a planet. And she brought these DNA, and I forgive me, every one of you, because I'm blanking to death on the name of it, and I should have put it in my notes here. But she brought this thing to the Genome Project, rather, to the DNA samples. And they just kind of laughed her off and said, we don't know what this is, but we're not going to take it. We're not going to take it. Right? It's a DNA bank of all the DNA of everything that's ever lived in the world. Like a supposed credible organization, and they wouldn't take this DNA that she had found that she believed was a Sasquatch. I mean, she's talking about a human. She talks about it being a human ape-like hybrid with no definitive qualities, stating that it could be one or the other for sure. It's absolutely incredible. Now, she went on Coast to Coast AM. She has a great episode on Coast to Coast AM. George Norrie gives her the full 4-hour treatment, lets her have her stage. And I implore that you go listen to this, because it's very fascinating if you have not heard it. And she has a quote in there saying the criticism of her work hasn't even come from genetics, but from people, quote, not qualified to even review the paper, or people who have never even bothered to read the analysis in the first place. That sounds like government bureaucracy if I've ever heard it. If I've ever heard it. This talks about the stuff we talked about at the head of the episode. They don't need you to know what you don't need to know. You know, and I know that I talked about the FBI using the samples earlier, and how I found that more credible. We're not going to touch base on that. We're not going to start a whole new topic on that until maybe another episode. But the fact of the matter is that she is a legitimate scientist with legitimate credentials. And at this point, too, I know it's 2019. I know nobody believes anybody or everybody believes everybody. Like, that's it. It's one side of the spectrum or the other. And that's really frustrating for me as a researcher. But that's how this has gone. Is that a person with legitimate credentials, with legitimate backgrounds, can't be taken seriously because you're talking about a taboo subject, a tabloid research subject like Sasquatch. The evidence doesn't stop there. Let's talk about Bigfoot shit. Because who the fuck doesn't want to talk about it, okay? We're going to spend just a minimal amount of time on this one. But, again, Dr. Melba does claim proof that the existence is based on the research conducted by tests on supposed shit with her team. It matches the idea that this thing isn't human, and this thing is a primate that isn't human. And you're talking about finding these things in the middle of Missouri, the middle of Texas, the middle of Oregon, the middle of California, the middle of fucking West Virginia. We talked about it earlier. Throw Bigfoot and the idea of Sasquatch out the window completely. There are no known primates in North America besides us. Okay? And nobody's taking a dump in the woods so that somebody else can go find it. I refuse to believe. People fuck with people all the time. But who takes a shit in the woods? And then how do you... Okay, I've taken a shit in the woods. Let's backtrack. I've shit in the woods because that happens. You're out hiking. It's a no holds bar, no conversations, no questions asked. I got to take a dump. And you're on a legitimate hike and there's nothing around. You pray to God you got some napkins or toilet paper, which I now don't hike without, in your bag. You take a dump in the woods. You do that. That's fair. Okay? But you do it about 10 to 15 feet off the beaten trail, right? We're not talking about hundreds of miles out in the wilderness. Beyond that, how the hell does anybody find a stool sample fresher than that? I don't believe it. I don't know if I believe in the Sasquatch poop theory. It's a little far-fetched for me, even for me, who is basically willing to believe just about anything. But again, you have a legitimate researcher in scientists with credentials who are looking into these things. And there's nothing to be said about it. Nobody, pardon the pun, gives a shit. And it breaks my goddamn heart. Now we have a few more parts to get towards as far as evidence is concerned. We have evidence, right, of sightings, witnesses, and videos and pictures, and this has been since day one. Since the ability to take a video or to take a picture has been in existence, we have been snapping some bite my tongue here, some pretty awesome pictures of supposed Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Yeti. And some of them are a man in a monkey suit. And I don't think any of us can deny that. But when you talk about the Patterson-Gimlin footage and the fact that math and science has gone into this thing and not necessarily been able to prove it, but that they haven't been able to disprove it, I think is one of the more compelling arguments that you can make as a researcher or as a believer in these things. Now, they have taken exact measurements using the film and using the known measurements out there and put Patty at about 7'6", and she's walking with a hunch because that's how they walk. You talk about what their footprints look like, and they talk about you can see it in some of the pictures here if you're watching the YouTube video. They have the ridge that shows how they walk, almost pulling themselves with their foot, which creates that edge of dirt that's pushed up, or soil or snow or whatever it may be that they're walking on, that's pulled up. And that's how you would need to walk if you grew up in the woods. You talk about how a human walks and how the foot. Great movie, a great documentary called The Unwanted Sasquatch on Amazon talks about this. I want to say his name is Jerry Miller, talks about how the foot and body act as a pendulum. Dr. Meldrum talks about how it's a pendulum. We have gotten so good at walking on flat ground that we barely pull our foot off the ground to create another step. Pause the fucking podcast. Walk across your room. Walk across whatever room you're in. Your foot barely comes a half an inch off the ground. That's the reason that frost heave or root growth under a sidewalk will make you trip even just a half an inch on the sidewalk. Because we have become so proficient in moving. Scientists have said this. I'm not just some jackass on a podcast, but scientists, that's how you walk. Okay? We have become so proficient that we don't even move our foot's even a half an inch off the ground. These things, it's called the mid-tarsal break, will plant their foot, heel down, just like humans do, then pad down to the front of their foot. But instead of arcing off of the toe and ball of our foot, they use the full middle of their foot from basically the mid-arch all the way to the front toes, rather than us as humans who just use the ball of our large toe. If you cut off the large toe of a human, you're going to fall over for the first 10 years walking. You got to really literally learn how to walk because of the way we work and the way the efficiency of the way we move works. But that's how this thing is able to move. When you look at that Patterson-Gimlin footage, this thing is picking its foot up back, and you see the back pads of its feet every time. If you look at any of the videos that have been, or the pictures rather, that have been flashing on my left here, you see those mid-tarsal breaks in those foots. But none of that means anything. None of it. At least not to the people who apparently matter. So, let's talk about tree knocks. I hate tree knocks. I hate them. I hate them with a passion. I hate the idea that somebody is going to bang, something is going to bang on a tree, and we're going to hear some call and echo response like we're playing the guitar with a bassist kind of reaction. The woods make a lot of weird noises. And if you've ever been out in the woods, if you've ever even looked at the woods, you know damn sure that the woods are making weird noises that we can't describe all of the time. All of the time. Tree fall, tree breaks, deadfall, whatever the hell you want to call it. Now, yes, there's been loud cracks and thwacks that have been heard and recorded that are like, man, that's like somebody with a full-blown baseball bat taking it to the trunk of an oak. But I just feel like as far as evidence is concerned, that those things are very easily and reliable. Those are easy things to get over. Those are easy things to kind of look at and say, hey, I think that these things can kind of be answered. Okay? I don't think tree knocks are very substantial. And just going to dovetail right into from tree knocks to tree structures. This is the whole basis of the episode. This is where all of my my vigor came from this episode, because I posted this, what I think is a great video, and showing these tree structures that I found in the Kettle Moraine. And we talked about it a little bit on my Twitter account and on my Instagram about how I don't think that these things are anything special. The universe acts in very random ways that can be very misleading. And just because a bunch of trees fall into a cone doesn't necessarily mean that they were created by any living creature at all, whether it be humans or not. Now, the second video of the picture that I posted, and you can find that on my Instagram and my Twitter page, which I will talk about towards the end of the cast here. The second one is very clearly man-made. It's very clear to see like what could be. Very made. That's not natural, is what I'm kind of getting at. It's a full teepee-like structure made of sticks. I'm about 6 feet off of a side trail, which is about 20 feet off of a main trail, in a very well-populated hiking area. There's no way in hell that I would believe that a Sasquatch would create this. But even if I was way out on these back roads of Oregon, in these small logging roads, hundreds of miles off of the normal road, that took me 2 hours to get to, that only 8 people visit a year, that I am going to sit here and believe that a bunch of sticks couldn't fall in a cone pattern in the middle of the woods. I just don't believe it. Or rather, I just don't see that I've seen any evidence that, in my opinion, would further my belief in what is already happening here. Again, the universe works in mysterious ways. That's just how things happen. Random chance, happenstance. That happens. And I think that that's overshadowed by your want to believe in something credible or serious, which I don't want to downplay. I think a lot of us go out there and a lot of us get into the woods and a lot of us go on these hikes and get in there and get dirty and say, hey, I think I found something. Because if you're like me, you've been walking around in the woods for years and have never seen anything. Now, I had my car side sighting and I had my UFO sighting, okay? And that it's very likely that you will see something because you are looking, right? It's more likely that you're going to see something than your sister is going to see something who thinks you're a crazy batshit weirdo, okay? Because you're out there looking for something. But that doesn't give you the credit to just say something is this thing because you believe it is that thing. And that's kind of where tree knocks and tree structures kind of come into it for me. And without evidence like vocals, or without evidence like tracks, or without evidence of bodily samples, but be it hair or skin or some kind of DNA sample, a lot of that kind of gets thrown to the wayside. You cannot take a sound of a stick hitting another stick and call it a Sasquatch thing, just like I can't take a bunch of sticks formed in a teepee structure. That's not physical evidence. One of the people on my Twitter page, I think, pointed it out really well for everybody. He said that there's no way that we can prove it wasn't a person. Where I think a lot of these other pieces of evidence, the tracks and the vocals especially, the hair samples and the DNA samples especially, can be like, this isn't human. It's so easy to look at these things and be like, any 12-year-old hiking with his parents just playing in the woods can put a bunch of sticks up on another street structure, on another sticks, and create a tree structure. And that's kind of how these things work. And I think, at the beginning of the podcast and for the last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you've been literally just listening to me go insane about evidence that I feel is actually credible to the source and the cause. But when you look at things like tree structures and tree knocks, I feel like that discredits a lot of the hard work that people have gone into in finding these other things. Now, I want to I don't know how I want to say it, but I want to make sure I say that doesn't mean I don't think anything could be created. It just means that as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it is. Okay? I think that there is a ton of evidence to the contrary that suggests it can't be those things. I find these tree structures 8 feet off of a side path. I find these tree structures 300 feet off of some crazy Northern California non-hiking area of government land. That's how the world works. Okay, that's how things work. These things are just out there. And I appreciate any researcher. I appreciate any one person who's going to come forward and say, hey, this is kind of what we have. This is what I have to show for it. Because at the end of the day, at least you're out there. At least you're out there doing something that helps you, that helps the cause, hopefully. But I just, in my heart of hearts, don't believe in the knocks or the structures. And for the reason of there's just too many other variables that could create these things. There's too many variables in the world that could answers that it could be. We talked about physical evidence in the tracks and in the vocals and in the body samples, and we talked about how it couldn't be X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z being humans or wolves or bears. It couldn't be any of those things, right? Scientific evidence backs those up. I don't see any scientific evidence that would back up a structure or a tree knock that would say there was no way that wasn't done by a human. Because at the end of the day, what is unfortunate? What is unfortunate is that there are people who are out there to hoax us. There are people out there to discredit us, and there are people out there just to troll you, just to know that you're out there in the woods, bumbling about to look for whatever the hell you want, to see whatever you want to see. There are people out there to make sure that you don't find the truth, to make sure that you don't see the truth, because they just want to have fun with you and they just want to fuck with you. And as much as I don't want that to be the situation, I do that shit in my everyday life. I fuck with people as much as possible in my everyday life about anything. If I'm at work, if I'm at home, if I'm at, if I'm at school, whatever it is, I'm just going to fuck with you because it's fun. Like, that's how people work. So to get all bent out of shape about the fact that people do this in the Bigfoot culture, that's not new. That's not something that doesn't happen. Okay? There are 1,000 tracks that have been created by 1,000 people to discredit the 1,000 real tracks that were created by a Sasquatch. There are vocals of the same manner, sightings of men in monkey suits, of jackasses on YouTube who just, they dressed up Barry in their local party store gorilla costume and shot him 50 yards away with a shitty camera walking through the brush. That happens, and these people are out there. But what I hope today's episode really did for you is bring you some bring you some ammo. Bring ammo to the table and give you that ability to kind of look forward and look past, rather, what these could be. Look for the host first. Look for it first. I can't. Cliff Barrickman has this great saying that make sure you looked at it, put on your skepticals. Make sure you look at it from a skeptic point of view first before you just full on believe. Another point of the unwanted Sasquatch stories are, our worst enemies as Sasquatch believers and Sasquatch researchers are ourselves, the community at large. These people who want to make a dime, who want to make $1, who want to make $1 million, who think they're going to go out there and change the world by creating a YouTube channel that's going to hit, by I am this guy in the woods and I see these things. Okay? There isn't an enemy around every corner, but there are plenty of people out there who are just out there to fuck with you and out there to make their money, out there to sell you their snake oil. That's been the situation in every regard, whether it be religion, whether it be knife sales, looking for Bigfoot, selling you a vacuum. These people are out there to sell you snake oil because it's an opportunity to make money. And who among us doesn't want to make an extra $1 in the easiest way possible? It's one of the easiest and oldest forms of entertainment is to just fuck with everybody else. That's free. That's free entertainment. It's free for me to strap on some wooden fucking Bigfoot shoes and just trounce around in the woods and make sure that didn't cost me anything. I mean, it cost me my time, I guess you could say, but if I had the day off work, who gives a shit? So don't go believing everything you see and believing everything you hear, but make sure at the same time that you come well armed to the conversation of skepticism with the evidence that has already been given to us. And I wish I had anything to end this on. I wish I had a positive thing to say, but I just have spent the last hour completely ranting, which is not necessarily what I had cared for the podcast, but more kind of like my uncut, like raw feelings on this situation. I didn't think for a second that this is what this episode was going to turn into. And after an hour and 9 minutes and 30 seconds, if you're still listening to this, I fucking love you. And I hope that I could have bestowed upon you some kind of knowledge and some kind of ability to formulate an argument. Look up Dr. Melba. Look up Dr. Melba. Look up Dr. Bindernagel. Look up Dr. Meldrum. Doctor, PhDs in their field, legitimate scientists, credible researchers, Cliff Barrickman, Matt Moneymaker, Lauren Coleman. These people are out there doing the work that you might not be able to do, but they can give you reason and evidence to support the contrary and to support all of us in what we're doing here. And I hope that you're on my side when I say that I want to believe in so many of these things, but at the same time, it's so easy, and you should think how easy it is to not believe, so that when you're talking to a skeptic, look at it from their perspective. Look at it and say, like, yeah, I get that you don't believe this. Because at the end of the day, what scientists look for is that physical evidence. at the end of the day, what Wes Gerber talks about in the Sasquatch Chronicles is, hey, I don't have one in my garage that we're researching, so we don't know anything about this. Don't go at it with the conviction that you know everything that there is to know about it. Go at it with the idea that you're not even looking to change that person's mind, but maybe for them to have the understanding that they can understand you a little bit better, understand your position a little bit better, where you're coming from, how you gained this knowledge. You know? So I just want to thank everybody again for dropping by and for doing this with me. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't really have. I could talk about this for 3 hours, but we're already in an hour and 11 minutes into the podcast. I always rather want to keep the podcast right around an hour. So if you want to talk to me, you guys, you can follow me on Twitter at DecryptedCast. You can follow me on Instagram at Decrypted Podcast and at YouTube by the same name at Decrypted Podcast, where you can catch a bunch of our other previous episodes. Like I said, you guys, I have no idea what the format of the episodes are going to be. The future format of the episodes are going to be about. And maybe this was not it. But one of the things we're going to talk about, we're going to start bringing guests onto the show and talking. I have a few guests lined up that would love to speak to you guys, authors of current books that are coming. We're not just going to talk about Bigfoot. We're not just going to talk about Sasquatch. We're going to talk about all kinds of goofy shit. So I hope you guys stick with me. I really hope you enjoyed episode 5. Good Lord. Episode 5 of the Decrypted Podcast. I want to thank everybody very much for the support that they have given me in the past. All the great comments and the great feedback that I got on Twitter for posting the videos and Instagram alike. I just want to thank you guys very much. So make sure that you like and subscribe the videos on YouTube. Make sure you follow on the Decrypted Podcast Instagram and Twitter page. And above all else, you guys, just thank you very much, very, very, very much from the bottom of my heart for sticking with me on this. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it, okay? You guys have yourselves a great evening. And we'll see you in episode 6. God knows what the hell we'll be talking about, but hopefully it won't be as ranty. Thank you guys very much. I love you. I'll see you next time.